And good morning, Utsada. Good morning, everyone. This is Hindu Lounge. Hindu Lounge episode number 54. And we are live. We come live every Sunday at 11 o'clock Eastern. Hindu Lounge is brought to you by Hindu Pact. Hindu Pact is the policy research and advocacy initiative of World Hindu Council of America, VHPA. We come live every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock Eastern on all our social media channels, YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter, and a few days later on Tag TV. And as always, I am with me is Utsav Chakrabarti. Utsada is the executive director of Hindu Pact, and I am Ajay Shah. I am the president of World Hindu Council of America, or VHPA. We come live every Sunday and we talk about the contemporary American Hindu issues or contemporary issues with the American Hindu perspective. So today, Utsada, we want to talk about the conflict that is going on in Israel between Israelis and the Palestinians, and we're going to provide an American Hindu perspective on that. We will also talk a little bit about the FBI raid that took place on the BAPS Swami Narayan Mandir. With that, Utsada, I turn it over to you to welcome our viewers, and then once you do that, we'll dive right into the topic. So welcome, Utsada, and welcome to Maya. I see that she just left, but I want to welcome her as well. Go ahead, Utsada.
Namaste, everybody, and good morning. This is the 54th show of Hindu Lounge. So we are way into our Hindu Lounge journey here. And today is a very interesting topic because, usually we talk about issues that directly impact Hindus in America or that bring about some community effect. But today it's unique in the way that we are going to talk about a different geography in the world which has very little Hindu population in it. But it is important nevertheless, because as you will see throughout the show, analyzing the conflict in the Middle East and its latest iteration. I mean, the Middle East has been in conflict on a similar issue for almost 1400 years. But the latest iteration of that conflict is something that is important to the American Hindu community because it impacts the community and how its people, Hindu American community people, uh, look at politics, look at geopolitics, uh, and how it transfers across generations. Because the perspectives change, issues change. So we are going to go deeper into this and discuss the Palestinian Israeli conflict as its current iteration exists today. So that would be the show today, and then later on, obviously, we are going to discuss the news items. One of which is the FBI raid at the temple, Robbinsville Temple in New Jersey, where the Swami Narayan Sansthan had to go through some real issues in terms of labor laws and construction issues. So we're going to talk about
and the kind of Hindu phobia that they faced as well.
yeah,
right?
they're not just faced, they're still facing, and I
They're
think
still facing.
it's not going to go away that easy. There is a really strong Hindu phobic ideas and statements emerging from all over the place, including from reputed
Absolutely.
institutions.
Yeah. So that
So-called
let's
yeah.
let's get into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the seeds of which, were, really the current iteration started in 1948. But historically, for several thousand years, I think there have been this has been a place where the Abrahamic religions evolved from, the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they all consider Jerusalem to be a holy city. And there have been historic conflicts in that region that last well over 2,000, 3,000 years, right? And so this is just, as you said, as you correctly said, this is just the latest iteration of that. And with terrible, consequences, human consequences, all through the history. So that why don't you walk us through the historic dilemma of the Arab-Israel conflict that is, in its current iterations, starting 1948.
Correct. And Ajay, I just want to, before I start, I want to clearly say that this is our perspective on the issue. As with most issues that are contentious in the Middle East, there are multiple perspectives and there are multiple historical narratives that those perspectives are derived from. So this is the perspective that we have as a community, as Hindu Pact, and obviously we are not claiming that everything we are saying, all Hindus have the same perspective, or all people belonging to that region have the same perspective. So I just want to put that caveat out there, and people can obviously write to us, call in and question our perspective on things, and we will be very happy to answer it. So we are open
and
to
it's not
engage.
that we are going to agree with each other either on everything that is being said, right?
Exactly,
So
exactly.
we will boldly and openly discuss where where our opinions diverge.
Absolutely, and that's what we do in Hindu Pact. I mean, between me
Absolutely.
and Ajay Bhai, we often disagree on the show, and we also, that gives us the ability to bring out nuances. And
Exactly.
nuances are, if there is any place in the world where nuances are critical, it is this part of the world. If only people understood that.
Yep.
So just going back, I'm going to go into the current post-industrial revolution in history, if I can put it that way, of that part of the world. And the nation of Israel, as you know, it was created because the Israelis moved back to their ancestral historical land, that was that their tribes came from after almost 1,000 years. But those areas already had significant Jewish population living in the Ottoman Empire during the Ottoman rule, which was the last, and later on under British rule. So Israel, came into being in the 1947, middle of the previous century, and since then, I think there has been a strong contention between the different Arab states that surround Israel, Iran, which is not Arab state but an Islamic state, and Israel, which is a very small, tiny piece of country that was created in the middle part of the previous century to address the issue of Jews having a homeland, historical homeland, because the Jews belong to that that area for thousands of years, and they have moved out and then moved back in. So that was the background of the state of Israel. But the animosity in the last century has been so strong after Israel was created that they have had 4 major wars and a couple of minor wars in the last 100 years, not even 100 years, in the last 70 years, 73 years to be precise. And these wars actually have framed the geography of the current conflict. When I say how the wars have framed the geography of the current conflict, it's because in 1948, when Israel was created, right after Israel was created, the Arab states attacked it, and there was fighting, and then both sides captured some territory, gave up some territory. What is called as Gaza Strip and West Bank of Palestinian territory in 1948 was actually captured by Egypt and Jordan in 1948. And at the time of ceasefire, these two countries controlled Gaza and West Bank, which is what is present day Palestine, considered as present day Palestine. So that status stayed on until 1967. But in between, there was a second Israeli-Arab war that happened in 1956, when a group of Arab countries took away the ability of European countries to travel through the Suez Canal without, but they had to take permission from Egypt. So once that happened, then there was a small war again, and then that lasted a few days, and a little bit of territory was exchanged in that war. Then there was a 6-day war, that came after that in 1967. And in that 6-day war, the Arab states primarily...
And that's the war that occurred during the holy Jewish festival.
No. That's not
that's
that
not
one.
the one. Sorry, that's not
there
the
is another
Yom
one
Kippur
after
war.
that. Yes,
that's the other one that came after that. Right.
Correct. So the 6-day war, or it's also called the
that's...
June War, it happened in the middle of the summer. That war probably had the most impact in terms of the geography of what is the Palestinian conflict today. Because in that war, Israel not only was able to capture what was West Bank and Gaza, but they also captured the Sinai Peninsula, which is a strip of desert, dry area, going all the way to the Suez Canal. And that entire region, Egypt lost. So what is important to understand in the 6-day war is that Israel didn't start the war. The war was started by a combination of different Arab states simultaneously attacking Israel. And in response, because they lost the war, Israel was able to capture in the south and west the Sinai Peninsula, and in the north near Syria, the Golan Heights, very infamous Golan Heights. And basically that became the status quo from 1967 onwards. And I think the 6-day war is very important, because this is an example of how aggressive military action by one side actually ended up making that side weaker, both in terms of territory and in terms of global impact and power. So the 6-day war was critical in that aspect. And Israel actually, even though it didn't start the war, it ended the war with a significant advantage in terms of geopolitics. And thereafter, I think some of that advantage was lost, partially during the Yom Kippur War, which Ajay Bhai, you were talking about the war that was started during the holidays of the Jews. And that happened in October 1973. The Yom Kippur War was actually significant because its impact later on is that it was a war in which Israel realized that its advantage in terms of conventional war-making ability and its ability to defend itself through conventional means had been significantly diminished. So even though most observers in the West would say Israel won the war, the Yom Kippur War, the real outcome of that war was Israel realized, and so did many Arab states, that Israel does not anymore have that significant conventional weapon capability advantage, conventional war-making advantage over the Arab states. The advantage was reduced. Israel obviously suffered a lot. Arabs suffered tremendously, because you have to remember that when we discuss all these wars and all these conflicts, these are real people who are suffering and dying in these conflicts. And when I speak about these issues and when I speak about this, I by no means want to diminish any side's uh, people. Both sides have real people. They have real sons and fathers going to fight and dying in this situation. So what is unfortunate though is that their powers that be globally do not see it often that way, and to them it's a tool of expanding their geopolitical
Well,
interest.
Utsada, let me challenge that notion a little bit. Let me challenge that notion a little bit. These are wars that are lasted, that have gone on for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years. And what you are saying about geopolitical interest and external forces and all that, that's somewhat of a recent phenomenon. But if you really look at historically in Middle East, these conflicts have always existed. So I think there are reasons and issues that are deeper than just the geopolitical interests of external forces, as you would call them. And I think a lot of the conflicts have to be evaluated on the basis of the historic facts that have existed, and sometimes I would go as far as to say historic animosities that have existed. So it is, I don't think that you can always boil it down to current geopolitical situation, because that is a very, in some ways it's a short-sighted view of things. It's in a history that has gone on for this is a history of 2000 years. You're looking at a slice of 70 years, but there are many 70 years embedded in that 2000 3000 year history. So I
Absolutely.
think I think you would, it might be of interest to people who are listening to actually put this into the perspective of this larger and I a larger uh, religious, social, political perspective, and not just the external, not just looking at it from the external environment, but the internal tensions that have existed for a long time.
Absolutely. But you know, in either case, it's still people who are dying. And what I'm saying is that it is it's still not good.
Well, no, it's not good, but why? I mean, see, you cannot solve any conflict without understanding why. And I think
Absolutely.
that analysis of why is important. And once you analyze that, then we need to say, okay, what is the Hindu thought on that? But let's continue with the analysis that you're doing. Very useful information. Renu Gupta ji has joined, and she also said very useful information. So I think you're doing a great job. I just want to make sure that we put this larger historic 3,000-year-old historic perspective in play when we talk about these conflicts. Right? Go ahead.
Absolutely. And each of the regions in the Middle East has a tremendously tragic history of conflict and colonization. I mean, it's
Yeah,
you will be
yeah,
surprised to see that a country like Egypt, for example, until the 1950s, for 1,000 years, Egypt actually did not have Egyptian rulers defining their destiny for 1,000 years. So it's really interesting because you would assume that some a country like Egypt, ancient civilization like Egypt, you know what's going on there. But it was very fascinating to find out, like, Egyptians were actually ruled by Turks for the longest period of time. The Mamluk dynasty took over Egypt at some point of time, which is basically Turkish slaves who were converted to Islam and started their own dynasty and controlled Egypt forever. So it's very interesting historical factoids that you will, every region in that part of the world, if you look into it, it's basically a story of colonization, conversion, and war. And
so I know another civilization that was very ancient was also not ruled for last 1,000 years by their own people. Um,
well, that
I won't give you
unfortunately,
any
that those
award. I
people
won't give
also
you any
don't
awards
discuss
for
it much.
guessing which one. I won't give you any awards for guessing which one. Okay.
That is true. That
But
is true.
here is a fascinating thought that I have, and tell me your view on it. In Middle East, you have the three major Abrahamic religions that evolved. Right. There's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And there were, among these three religions that evolved in the Middle East, there were constant conflicts. Okay. The only other place that in the world where multiple ways of worship evolved is India, right? Bharat. And you can look at Bharat and you can say, look, I mean, within the Vedic Hindu Dharma, there were so many philosophies that were there, at least 6 different philosophies. Then outside the purview of a direct Vedic Hindu Dharma, there was Buddha Dharma, Jain Dharma, Sikh Dharma, all of them evolved.
Actually,
How many?
you shouldn't, theologically speaking, and some people may not like to hear this, but I think Sikh theology is not outside the Vedic.
No, I get it. I get it. I'm just putting it in a slightly different perspective to drive home a point.
Right.
That how many way of worship conflicts arose in India.
So you have to understand why there was.
Why is that? And why is that? So is that is? I mean, I just wanted to kind of point that out, that there is the inherent harmony, even though people try to say that, look, I mean, India has many different ways of worship and many languages and many ways of ways of celebrating festivals and many modes of work, all of that. Put that aside, even despite of all that, the underlying inherent strength of Hindu philosophy, of Hindu dharma, is this basic acceptance of others. And when you don't have that kind of basic acceptance, then you end up with the situation like the one they have in Middle East. I just wanted to kind of, while we are talking about Middle East, I think this contrast is important for everyone to kind of keep in mind, that here are two regions that have given birth to multiple ways of worship, and compare and contrast the two. All right, Utsada, I don't want to take away your time. Please, you were going to talk about next about the Oslo Accord and the state resolution, right?
No, before I go
state
there,
solution rather, state solution, Oslo resolution.
So before I go there, I just
convention. Yeah, please go ahead.
Before I go there, I just wanted to say that, look, the reason, point that you were bringing up about the contrast between the religions that rose in the Middle East versus the ones that rose in the Indian subcontinent, I would say that the major difference between the two is that the exclusiveness of what their theology speaks of. The ones that came out, the Abrahamic systems that came out, barring Judaism because they came first, so they didn't have anybody to compare with in terms of their pantheon of theologies. But the ones that came after that, basically each claims that they are the final word of divinity. Then so they kind of have to be exclusive in their finality. Whereas the ones that came in the Indian subcontinent, the different schools of philosophy, the dharmic principles, that they were all evolutionary in nature. So they didn't come up as a complete replacement of the one before them, and didn't claim finality. So they were not like, okay, this is it. There is no more anybody coming after me. And if anybody does, then we're gonna take care of them. So that approach was never there in the Indian subcontinent, and the philosophies and the schools, the dharmic schools that came up here in the Indian subcontinent. So there was that significant difference, and you see that in the way they panned out. And going back, but it is important to discuss this, because I personally believe, and I think many people in the West today do not give enough importance to this aspect. Theology plays a tremendous role in the way communities have behaved in the Middle East over the last, as you say, 1,500 years. It's critical, and I personally believe it is the most important factor among other factors. So, moving forward.
Hey, Utsada, can I just say one thing quickly? It is because, the problems that you see today in the Indian subcontinent, to some extent, are because of these external non-Indian philosophies that have come to India. Wouldn't you agree?
That is true, because what happens is when you import a thought process that believes in finality and exclusiveness, your own thought process changes, and then humans are humans everywhere, and it's how you think that decides and dictates how you behave. So if your thought process has changed from being a iterational all absorbing philosophical system to, okay, I am the final one, you cannot exist after me, and that's it, then obviously whichever part of the world you're from and you are living in, you will actually show your behavior accordingly. And that has been a significant problem in every part of the world, not just the Indian subcontinent. I mean,
Yeah,
you go to Europe, you go to Eastern Europe, you go to Indonesia, you will see the same problem. Or you go to
absolutely.
Turkey. I mean, what is modern day Turkey used to be part of the larger Hellenic civilization, the Greek civilization. So
Yeah. So the one quick suggestion, you may want to bring the microphone right in front of you when you're speaking. It will give you a little bit of better audio and it won't crack as a little. Sometimes it cracks a little bit. So thank you. All right, moving on to the Oslo, Oslo Resolution Accord. Tell us about Oslo Accord.
So this is a very important milestone in the last 50 years that had it had the opportunity and the ability to change the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as we see it today in significant ways. And it happened in the early 90s. It happened in 93, again, a part of it in later on in 95. What Oslo Accord was essentially meant to do was to bring peace between what was the state of Israel, the country of Israel, and the Palestinian territories by actually moving towards setting the cornerstones of what would be a two-state solution. And it would have eventually led to the two-state solution, in which Israel started off by recognizing the self-governance of West Bank and Gaza. There was a complete administration that was set up in both these places. Eventually, Gaza kind of fell off the board, and then they went their own way. But West Bank continues to have some form of self-administration uh, in the name of what is called Palestinian Authority. So Oslo Accord was basically a compromise between the two sides, setting the cornerstones for a two-state theory, a two-state identity. And it is important because, for the longest period of time, many people who support the Palestinian cause in the West, actually everywhere, not just in the West. I mean, you go to Asia, their argument was that Israel doesn't recognize the two-state theory. Israel doesn't want to give a statehood to the Palestinian community. And Oslo Accord actually was meant to address that. It really was meant to create the foundation for the two-state theory. What many supporters of Israel around the world would say is that one of the reasons, and I agree with this point, one of the reasons why we still have the conflict today is because the Oslo Accord was not implemented to its fullest extent. The line of thinking that should have followed Oslo Accord was not followed through. And there were interests, vested interest in the Islamist world. I use the word Islamist very carefully here, who did not want the two-state solution to pan out, because then their goal of delegitimizing Israel as a country, the entire country of Israel, that was their goal. That would not have been fulfilled. So part of the conflict that we see today in different forms, and I'm not going to say that, both sides, only one side is at wrong here. Both sides are making mistakes every day at a tactical level. But largely at the fundamental doctrinal level, I think the failure of Islamist nations to address and their proxies, Hamas is not independent on its own. Hamas is working for somebody else. It doesn't have the ability to do things on its own if somebody else doesn't give them the support they deserve, they get. So organizations like Hamas, organizations like Islamic Jihad, by extension organizations like Hezbollah, which is Shia Islamist group, Shia radical Islamic group, these organizations have worked very hard to dilute and basically pull back from the Oslo Accord, which has made it next to impossible for Israel to move towards a two-state solution. And that is my take on it. Obviously, there are people out there who will say Israel also made mistakes. Israel also has not addressed all the issues that it was expected to address out of the Oslo Accord. But from my vantage point, I believe it is these radical Islamic groups with the support of their Islamist allies that have actually made Oslo Accord untenable, and therefore the current conflict.
Right. And so let's get into current conflict. So the roots of the current conflict actually goes to 1948 court judgment that, or 1948, there was a small area, Sheikh Jarrah, where Jewish settlers used to live, or Jewish residents used to live. That was the area that was occupied at some point by Arabs, and the Israeli court, through many years of uh, case making through various courts, finally decided that that area belongs to Jews, and that's what triggered the current conflict. Correct?
So when you say the current conflict, it's what's happening in
And like what is
2021.
happening in last 1 week?
Yeah, it's what's happening in 2021. That was triggered by the incidents at Sheikh Jarrah, where the four Palestinian families were evicted for non-payment of rent by the courts of Israel. So I'll tell you what happened here. In 1948, and you mistakenly used the words Jewish settlers. That's not, they were not settlers.
Oh, they were the residents. Yeah, the
The
residents,
Jewish,
original residents.
Jewish residents of Sheikh Jarrah actually, they were the owners in 1948 of that piece of land. They had full legal ownership of that land, including court paperwork. But when the Israeli-Arab conflict happened in 1948, Jordan, if you remember in the beginning, we discussed this. Jordan and Egypt actually took control of that area. So when Jordan and Egypt took control of that area, they settled, and here the word settle is underlined, Palestinians in that area. So there were the Palestinian families settled in Sheikh Jarrah on a property that was owned by Jewish community, Israeli citizens, which was later transferred to a nonprofit. Now, fast forward decades, Israel, through its courts, basically the Jewish community said, "Hey, we want to take back this land. This is our land. We have papers for it." So they went through the Israeli court, and in that process, the Israeli court says that Palestinians can still live there, but because the owners were Jewish community members and the owners were Israelis, the people who are living there should be paying rent. And if they're not paying rent, then they should be moved out. So what is basically happening right now is the process of not having those Palestinian families live there for non-payment of rent essentially triggered what is now the Sheikh Jarrah conflict, based on, now both sides are at war, and the Palestinians claim that they are being moved away from what is their land, whereas the Israelis are saying that this land always belonged to the Jewish community. Look at the paperwork. All we are asking is that you move out because for 60 years you haven't paid rent on this land, on this.
So that let's what is the Hindu-American what is the American Hindu perspective on this? That is the key, because certainly as and while you're at it, what should be the Hindu perspective, global Hindu perspective, including the Indian Hindu perspective on this issue? So now that we have laid the groundwork of the history and the current conflict, and we have given people the background of it, what is the, what is our view? What is our American Hindu view on it?
So we have to understand,
really right?
Say what were you saying, Ajay bhai?
So what is the American Hindu perspective?
Correct. So we have to understand that in this whole, in the current conflict of the Sheikh Jarrah conflict of 2021, there are two key pointers. Who is the legal owner of the land? Who are the people being evicted? And what they believe in. So if, as a Hindu, I would be saying, if I live in country X, I follow the rules and the laws of that country. So if Sheikh Jarrah is part of Israel, and if Israeli court laws, Israeli judicial laws are applicable to Sheikh Jarrah, then I follow the court, whatever the court decides. If I'm living in America, if a Hindu is living in America, if a Hindu is living in India, if the courts of India decide something, they will follow that. For that matter, if the Hindu is living in Europe, they will have to follow the same thing. Here is the point of contention. Many people who are opposing this point of view also believe that Israel has no jurisdiction over Sheikh Jarrah, and some of them, and this is where I have a problem, some of them also believe that Israel has no jurisdiction over Israel. And that is, I think, again, takes you back to the root of the conflict about, it takes me back to Oslo Accord. If you are not going to accept Israel as a legitimate state, as a legitimate country, then obviously you will not be taking Israeli judicial system on its face value, and then you will not be responding positively to the court's decisions, which is what is happening in Hamas controlled areas, because now Hamas is saying that we don't really believe Israel should exist. So why do we believe that Israel
Hamas has
was
never said, well, I think Hamas has always said Israel should not exist. It's not now, but it has since 1948. Hamas has said, and so did PLO. They say that Israel should not exist at one time, right?
But
Hamas has
PLO
always
compromise. See, PLO and
compromised
yeah.
during Carter era. PLO compromised, but Hamas has never compromised, and that. Go ahead.
So my point here is that it is, for viewers and for people who are wanting to know more about this issue, or people who already know more about this issue, our perspective is that follow the laws of the land. And that is where I think I believe that it is important to let the courts actually.
Also, that itself. So here is where I disagree with you, and this not because I think not because of any other reason, but I think that the kind of nuanced position that you're advocating here is only applicable if everyone has agreed to the same set of laws. When there's no single frame of reference, so you can say, for example, in America, we say that, okay, you know what, we are going to use Constitution as a guiding point, and if there is any conflict, we are going to resolve it based on the laws laid out by the Constitution of America as interpreted by the various courts, landing up to going up to Supreme Court. When there is a fundamental disagreement about when there's a fundamental disagreement about whether a country should exist, or whether certain people have certain rights or not, or certain people are, have been rendered stateless or not rendered stateless, when you have no single frame of reference, legal frame of reference, then to say that everyone should follow the same laws is itself a fallacy, because there's no single set of rules that people have to follow. So when you say everyone should follow Constitution, whose Constitution, right? There's no such thing as single Constitution, because there's West Bank, and then there's the other occupied territories, the Gaza, and then there's State of Israel. So that there are multiple territories, multiple laws, and there's no single frame of reference. So we have to kind of keep that in mind as we talk about this. So I also come at it from a very Hindu perspective. I want to say, from a Hindu perspective, Hindus should ally with those who have allied with Hindus. And that is as simple as it gets. Okay. You can write a nuanced book about Israel and the Palestinian conflict, but I will give you a very simplistic view. And there I say that, look, there was a Pulwama attack, right? And 43 Indian soldiers, paramilitary troop people were killed. Almost all, no, not almost, all of them Hindus. Okay, who came in defense of India? Netanyahu tweeted, and he expressed support in India. India got, he provided India with a lot of military technologies to Hindus, basically, to defend themselves. And but there was an anti-CAA resolution that was in Chicago, an anti-CAA resolution where CARE and other Hamas-allied groups were against Hindus in Chicago. Okay, none of them took a nuanced position. And I will tell you, the Hindu position, and the people who came to the defense of Hindus and worked with the Hindus were people who were Jewish, Stand with Israel and other groups. They came and they supported the Hindus in Chicago. So there was no nuanced position that Hamas took, and there was no nuanced position that CARE took. So my question to you is, why are you taking Leon's position?
I'm also not. I'm not saying that that we there is. I have any sympathies for Hamas or care. If you notice, what I am saying is that, see, it's a very interesting point you brought up, and this is something that resonates within the Hindu community a lot in America. The two examples you gave are both examples that concern the country of India. There are Hindus in America who really are not attached to the country of India, and they are, they could be third generation Hindus in America. So what I'm saying here is that it's very simple for you, because as a Hindu who faces, systemic oppression in certain parts of the world by the same people who go on and support Hamas, your point of view is very clear that, hey, I am treated really badly by the same people who support Hamas. Why would I support anything that Hamas wants to support? Or, as people associated with Hamas or sympathetic to Hamas, you can decide the gray areas surrounding it. What I am saying here is that not all Hindus have the same viewpoint. The reason for that is because you came as to America as a Hindu from India. You have strong connections to families in India. You understand and identify the issue that India as a country, obviously 80%, 90% of the Hindus from around the world come from India. So for you, the choice is simple. For somebody who is a Hindu in America, who has very little connection to India, probably doesn't even understand the issues and the oppressors in that part of the world, they will look at it from a different position. And they will look at it from the vantage point of what their high school teacher tells them or what their campus group tells them. So this is where, we have to understand how intersectionality is playing into American mindsets. If somebody in, let's say, in some university in California has identified this issue as a corollary of another issue that somebody empathizes with in Europe, for example, then they will automatically get sucked off into the Palestinian conflict from the viewpoint of the underdog. And that is the important point I want to underline here. It's the perception of who is the underdog that is often driving people's approach towards this issue, not guided by those that are like you. For you, it is a simple choice.
Hey, so let me point some other things, okay?
Yeah.
The Hindus who have tried, American Hindus, not Hindus from India, who have tried to build mandirs and in America, and that have been held up by the representatives of CARE and other such organizations, not directly associated with CARE, indirectly associated with CARE, but the same group of people have held up permits to Hindus who want to build temples in America. Not an American issue. There are textbooks that are written about Hindu Dharma in America, in California. Who are the forces that are aligned against Hindus in that? Not people, it is not an American, it's not an Indian issue. This is an American issue, American textbook guided towards the Hindus in America. And who are the forces aligned against Hindus? The same people who are right now in taking another side, or not the Israeli side of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. So what I'm trying to say, Utsoda, is that you presented a viewpoint that, oh, I'm saying this because I have an India-centric view. I'm not saying this because I have India-centric view. I'm saying this because I see the permits of temple in America being held up. I see the caste issue in various, in Santa Clara City Council or at Cal State University being brought up. I see the California textbook, and I see who is aligned against Hindus. And I take this view that this is not a India-centric view that I'm presenting. I'm presenting a Hindu-centric view here, an American Hindu-centric view, not just India Hindu-centric view. Okay, it just so happens that in this particular case, the America and India-centric Hindu views converge. Okay, and now, having said that, I do have several friends who were born and brought up in Palestine, and I have talked to them. I've talked to them about this conflict, and I have said this, look, the easiest way to earn the Hindu support, and Hindus are very fair-minded. the easiest way to earn Hindu support is take a list of these, key Hindu issues in America, for example. Take the California textbook issue. Take the Santa Clara, County caste issue, and express your support. Come in support of Hindus. Come in support of American Hindus. And if you take half a step, Hindus in America will take 2 steps. But this cannot be a one-sided, give all, take none. And especially when Hindus in America are constantly under attack everywhere. And that's why, Utsada, I do not take the nuanced approach. I mean, this is a question of building alliances. This is a question of intersectionality and building alliances in America. So let's have some good faith, interfaith effort, good faith, alliance building, good faith coming together with the Palestinian and Hindu communities. And let that be the starting point.
I agree with you. I'm not saying that what your perspective is in any way wrong. In fact, you are looking at it from a very solid and very definitive perspective. But what we need to understand here is that outside the Hindu perspective, there are many who are looking at it, who are Hindus, American Hindus, who do not have this Hindu perspective. Many of them don't even probably identify as Hindus. They probably identify as South Asians or something else. And their identification is something different from their Hindu identity. They could be, America, it's probably it's the skin color, because that's what America cannot get out of discussing. So there are many of these identity markers that often define how many Hindus in America look at things. And that is where it is important for us to even center those viewpoints and analyze them, because otherwise we will only be analyzing a small slice of population and the perspective it represents, which is a very definitive perspective as yours. So if you look at the other population segments perspective and why that population segment has a divergent, sometimes divergent, sometimes congruent perspective to yours, I would have to say that what defines those understandings of the issue, Palestinian-Israeli issue, is often what they see as who is the underdog. And I think we have to refocus on this understanding of the underdog in this conflict. Often what is presented is that Israel is a country with better technology. Israel is a country with a better economy. Israel is a country with better quality of life. Therefore, the other side is the underdog. This is literally sometimes what makes an average Hindu who is 20 years old in an American campus decide which side he or she is on. Like, they literally don't know anything more than that. Yeah. And I want to address this point, Ajay bhai. Let me finish, because this is the point please. That we have to understand and address. So to that person, if you explain, hey, you know what? I am in support of Israel's perspective because many of the American Jewish community members come and support me when radical Islamists target me. They will not be swayed or convinced by that point of view, because to them, that radical Islamist perspective is sometimes often the underdog's perspective in their worldview that has been created for them in their campuses or wherever they are. So we have to work hard to actually educate those people to understand who really is the underdog in this region. I mean, is it a country of 4 million people, or is it a country of millions of people with geographies 100 times larger than Israel, that surround Israel, that really have taken it to a point where a Jewish person cannot live a normal life in an Islamic country? So question is, who is the underdog here? So if you were to read media outlets around the world, you would be almost unanimous in thinking that, hey, it's the Palestinian who is the underdog here. But my question to everybody is it? Like, just because Israel has a better technology to defend itself, does it mean that does that make Israel the ruler here, or the dominant country here? What defines underdog? Does demography define underdog? If demography defined underdog, then Israel is the biggest underdog in that entire region. And if population growth is a definition of underdog, then I'm fully on Israel's side, because their population is not even growing. And look at this other side. They will probably overwhelm Israel just by the amount of people that they have. So I want to question people on that aspect and refocus their understanding of the issue based on, if you are being swayed by who the underdog is, then ask yourself what defines an underdog. So that's my point.
Yeah, I think the real, I still say that the real underdog in America is actually Hindus. And I, if you, if the Hindu second and third generation does not understand that and cannot evaluate the Hindu interest based on Hindus being the real underdog in this in America, then it is something where all the Hindu organizations who are working with children and youth have, have something more to do. I mean, I would even actually venture, we have said this before and I would say this again, in this particular aspect of evoking the importance of Hindu identity in America, we have done a poor job, because we have never felt the need to present Hindu issues and Hindu identity issues in a way that Hindus, as the, in education we might be, doing well, in wealth we might be doing well, but really when it comes to socio cultural aspects of things in America, socio-cultural life in America, we are the real underdog. When every aspect of Hindu life is under attack, we are the real underdog. And if we don't start evaluating the global issues from that American Hindu perspective, then we would have failed. And that is why I think all of these conflicts, I bring them home and I say, how do I educate the next generation and the future generations based on the Hindu interest? And we can probably discuss this. I'll give you the last word before we move on to the next segment, which is the Swami Narayan Mandir in New Jersey, and we also have a guest waiting, I think, to talk on that issue. But Utsada, why don't you go ahead and close this topic out? I give you the last word.
No, so I want to leave this topic with a few questions, because that is the most important thing that people have to answer for themselves. We don't have enough time to discuss all the points that are to be discussed here. It will take us 2 days. The questions I want to leave people with is that, what defines an underdog? And that is the question. Does the number of people being killed on either side a definition of who the defining factor of who the underdog is? So does it mean that Israel has to just let more of its people die to be the underdog or to be the right side in this issue? Question number two is, what is the difference between state actors and non-state actors in this conflict? And who will hold, if you are going to hold state actors to a standard of morality and answerability, who will hold the non-state actors to the same standards of morality and answerability? If state actors have to follow Geneva Convention, and you are going to equate the non-state actors at the same level as the state actors, then you have to make and ask the non-state actors questions the same that you are asking the state actors. So people who are going to look at this issue from not as simple a way as Ajay Bhai did, which is, as a Hindu, the American Jewish community stands with me, therefore I stand with them. If you don't identify as a Hindu, but you are a Hindu because you have a Hindu name, and you still identify with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in other ways than how Ajay Bhai put it, then ask yourself these questions. Who holds the moral high ground here? And what defines the moral high ground? Does number of people dying on each side a definition? If tomorrow 300 Jews die, will suddenly Israel have a moral high ground? That is the question you have to ask. So there has to be a more fundamental effort that needs to be made to understand this issue. And that is where I'm trying to guide people towards.
Thank you, Utsada. Utsada, let's pivot to the next issue, which is this week's news item. As you know, Utsada, we were all engaged in understanding the Human Rights Commission report on caste as a protected class designation in the county of Santa Clara in Bay Area in California. And the day before the hearing, or maybe a day and a half before the hearings, New York Times, reported that FBI had raided the premises of BAP's Swaminarayan Temple. So it's a Baucharasi Swaminarayan Mandir Temple in Robbinsville, New Jersey. It is one of the most amazing mandirs, and I want to just show this picture, Utsada. It is, uh, it is. I have seen many mandirs in America. This is, and it's still under construction. It's really a unique mandir in New Jersey. So this is just, I think people should just do a Google search and look at more pictures. A beautiful lake, intricately carved mandir. And this, and FBI raided it, and they said that there were labor issues as to the payment, that was made, and it was, maybe, not as per the American laws. They were not at minimum wage. There were some issues that FBI has raised related to R1 visa, and the legal system will sort these out, right? But I want to I there were a New York Times article brought up several other things that really bothered me, Utsada. And these are the issues that really bothered me are, they said that one of the Swamijis in the sanstha, in Swaminarayan sanstha, called the workers ants. And Utsada, I can tell you that I've met people from BAPS for decades now, and I cannot imagine, uh, leave alone Swamiji, I cannot imagine any, even even a ordinary, person who is a, who is a devotee of Swaminarayan Mandir, uh, think of the people who are doing this, intricate devotional work of building a temple as ants. Okay, so I don't want to talk about the legal issues, because law will take its own course and people will sort it out. But I cannot imagine any devotee who is selflessly working, and you have to just go to the mandir and see the selfless devotion of tens of thousands of people across America. I've been to the LA temple, I've been to the UK temple, I've been to other mandirs, and all of them, I cannot imagine anyone who is doing that kind of selfless service thinking of people who are devoted, who are building these mandirs as ants. This word Dalit splattered all over the New York Times article. And I don't know how many people who were building that were Dalits, how many were not there. I don't know the composition. But I can also tell you, Utsada, from my experience of going to the Swaminarayan Mandir in Robbinsville, nobody asked me what was my caste. Nobody asked me what was my mode of worship. Uh, I cannot imagine the kind of accusations that New York Times made about caste being really true either. And New York Times, of course, made it a caste issue, and they put, the caste label everywhere. So I ask you, and we have a guest waiting, so I'm going to admit the guest also in the lab, and they want to talk about this issue. But I ask you, what is your view on it? Why is this now? Why is this is the most prominent, one of the most prominent Hindu organizations in America. They are actually the only Hindu organization in America which has advocacy effort in Washington D.C. with a formal office and all of that. So my question to you is it why they're targeted? Why are they being targeted?
Ajay bhai, so there are a couple of uh, things we have to understand. And again, these are very initial stages of understanding this issue. So we will obviously be updating ourselves and the listeners at points later on. But on first look, I think what is happening here is that the New York Times article was very indicative of the fact that it was the tail wagging the dog here. So New York Times already wanted to do something targeting the largest American Hindu institution in terms of its reach, its membership, its following. They already had a decision made beforehand that they wanted to do this, and they also had the agenda prepared. They just wanted to insert it into any legal issue that would come relating to this organization. And the generous flattering of use of the word Dalit to define this issue and color this issue, literally, for lack of a better word. It's really sad to say this. I'm really sad to say this, but That's what New York Times basically did. And, it's the tail wagging the dog. Now it is the flavor of the month to go and target. It's one more trope in the bag of tropes that are used to target Hinduphobia, target Hindus, and use Hinduphobia. It's, if you see the New York Times article, it's so blatantly aimed at connecting some dots that would really end up making India and Hindus look bad. And I mean, I'm yet to see New York Times go to this extent. Let's say, just 2 months ago, there was this huge expose on members of CARE who were cutting, young women's hair off because they were not covering their head. I didn't see New York Times do a, article where they targeted the entire Muslim community for what CARE members were doing in terms of cutting young women's hair off for not covering their head. You would never see that in New York Times. In fact, New York Times would write an article saying that is Islamophobia to even mention Islam in such an article. And here you have New York Times literally going crazy, trying to make an issue of Dalit, Hindus targeting quote unquote Dalit members of their community out of something that is completely unproven. There is no evidence yet. And truth will come out. But it is one more example of blatant Hinduphobia that is practiced by institutions that are mainstream in America, that are respected in America. I mean, some people may not trust New York Times. Some people may not believe, most things that New York Times says. But there is no doubt that New York Times is still considered a very powerful institution in this country. And for that institution to actually promote Hinduphobia to this degree shows, going back to the question of who the underdog is, for people in America who think, Hindus are not underdogs. If this was not an evidence of how Hindus need to unite because they are underdogs, there will never be one. Ajay bhai.
It was not just New York Times, right? This news item was picked up by all major news agencies, so Reuters, AP, they all picked it up, and it was not just that. I mean, Al Jazeera did a companion story on it, as you would expect. So you wouldn't expect anything less from Al Jazeera, and it didn't disappoint. So
Al Jazeera, Al Jazeera. I would just like people who believe, people who really trust Al Jazeera should. I think they are they have to just research more and figure it out themselves. I mean, if you still trust Al Jazeera after all these years, I think you really don't listen to our show. I think those people don't even come to our show because
that's why I said that Al Jazeera, Al Jazeera definitely Utsoda did not disappoint, and so that's why this, right? We have Yathat Thakur who has called in, and Yathatji, if you want to unmute yourself and turn your camera on, I know you've been on the holding pattern for quite some time. I think you want to talk about this particular issue, so please, I did text you, please, on the chat, but please turn on your microphone and your video and express your views. While you're turning that on, I want to read some of the comments that have come in. So Mahendra Sapaji has said that a simple labor issue turned into race issue to malign Hindu Dharma. Again, we can't comment on the labor part of it, but Mahendra Bhai is absolutely right. It has been turned into a Hindu-phobic issue. And Utsada, both you and I were at the Santa Clara, virtually on the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission hearings, and half a dozen people referred to this particular issue, right?
I think the timing was eerily and very conveniently, not coincidental.
Absolutely. And while we are at it, and if Yathatji, I don't know if he's still on or not, he's showing us he's still on. But before we get to, while he is joining and turning on his audio and video, let's, tell us a little bit, a summary of what happened at the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission hearings.
Well, as was expected, the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission, which is not a government body, or it's a volunteer body, not a professional body, they postponed any further action or any further work on the so-called caste inclusion issue until 2022. So I think in some ways it was a victory for the Hindu community in Santa Clara. Um, what it needs to be is eventually that this particular issue needs to be exposed, and the people behind this issue needs to be exposed. The people who are trying to bring up the caste marker identity issue as integral to uh, American society. What it is essentially trying to do, those people who want to bring caste as an identity marker, is to make sure that the Hindu community never calls itself Hindu. It starts identifying under caste brandings. It starts identifying under, sub identities that don't need to be there in America. I mean, if our goal is to make American Hindus identity group that is outside all these divides that the colonial construct brought to the Indian subcontinent, then it's better for us not to have caste as an identity marker, because that is aimed at destroying the Hindu community in America. And I think that's what the goal of those people are, and they've made it clear on more than one occasion.
Absolutely. So I'm going to give Yatharth Thakur one more chance to kind of turn the audio and video on. Otherwise, we have to move on to the next regular segments that we have. So I think we should just move on at this stage, and if he turns it on at a later time, we can bring him in. So that brings us to our last three segments. And the first one is the Hindu Seva Act of the Week. And as we always do, let me go to our slide deck, and hopefully you can hear the music. So Hindu Seva Act of the Week, and so that for Hindu Seva Act of the Week, once again, with the kind of condition, we did a whole show on this, the kind of conditions that are going on in India with COVID-19 relief effort, and all that we are doing as World Hindu Council of America, VHPA. I urge people to go to vhp-america.org. We are sending oxygen concentrators, respirators, and we have also been sending funds for ecologically sound, dignified, cremation. So multiple efforts. I think World Hindu Council of America, VHPA, has now sent goods and materials and cash worth over $1.6 million. And we have also helped other organizations, whether it is Seva International or whether it is Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's Art of Living, and several other organizations. We have helped them with the logistics by providing labor hours and providing logistical support. So that I have never seen Hindu organizations like Seva International, like World Hindu Council of America and others rise to the occasion and in a week mobilize so many resources to really help people in Bharat who are going through some really, really difficult times. As you know, this past 3 days were even more difficult because not only people were going through COVID, but they also had a major cyclone that came in. So it's just overall a really challenging times, a challenging time for people who are in Bharat. So with all our, really prayers and thoughts to people who are going through difficult times, please go to vhp-america.org, pick and click on donate button and pick COVID-19 relief efforts in India and make a generous contribution. We cannot thank you enough for doing that. And we want to assure you that your contribution will not be wasted. We have a track record of 50 years where money that is being donated goes to the right people and there's no wastage. With that, Utsada, any comments on that before we go to the Hindu good news of the week?
No, Ajay bhai, I think the what was being done over the last month on the COVID relief is really commendable. I think communities out there, even non-Hindu communities, listening to this show, they need to look into the work that is being done by VHP America and many, Seva International, and really, it is one of the most effective ways of helping this current crisis in India. And VHP America and all these organizations, Seva International, have one of the lowest overheads, and that is very important because you will see many organizations giving ads out there which have huge overheads, and not everything goes to the ground. So there is a reason why we don't give ads, we don't spend money on things outside actual relief work, and that is important.
Absolutely. Yep. And with that, Utsada, the most anticipated segment of the week, the Hindu phobe of the week.
Ajay bhai, so the I would let you talk about the Hindu
Oh,
photo of the
wait,
week.
wait, wait. We didn't do the Hindu good news of the week yet. Ah,
Okay.
Utsada, I was so eager to move on. All right, Hindu good news of the week. So, Utsada, let me go to the Hindu good news of the week. So you remember, Utsada, a few weeks ago, we talked about the USCIRF report. This is the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. And they classified India as worst of the worst. And they recommend that US government put sanctions on India and organizations in India and all of that, and government officials in India, because India is one of the worst, as bad a religious freedom violator as, say, Pakistan, where three non-Muslim girls get abducted a day and get forcibly converted, or Hindu temples get destroyed every single day and every other day, and in Saudi Arabia and all the other places where there's a constitutional discrimination against people of other faiths, and they wanted to put India in. They recommended that India be put in the same category. Now, the good news, Utsoda, is that when Antony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State, had finally comment when he talked about this, and about what Biden administration is going to do, he did not mention India as a country that was going to be sanctioned. And I think a lot has to do with a lot has to do with the geopolitical issues, but we should not underestimate the work that Hindus in America, the American Hindus, have been doing in this respect as well, the advocacy work. So kudos to all the American Hindus who rose up to the occasion, and we are glad that Biden administration is unlikely to accept the USCIRF report on India being the worst of the worst violators of religious freedom. Your thoughts?
Well, I think goes to show two things. Number one, that USCIRF on its own has very little credibility, even to the US government. And I think the big portions of the US government, irrespective of which political party they belong to, with right now it's the Democrats, previously it was the Trump administration, they all understand and see USCIRF for what it is. It is a special interest group that caters to special interest agendas, in India's case against agenda driven against the Hindu community, and in India phobic agenda. That was made very clear in recent exposés that were brought. Disinfo Lab had a very interesting expose on it. We talked about it in one of our shows. So I think Secretary of State Tony Blinken saw the report for what it is, especially the part that targets India. I also believe that they have other sources of information that probably play a bigger role in defining who they need to sanction and want to sanction as perpetrators of human rights abuse. I think those sources of information probably played a bigger role in why Tony Blinken chose China as a country to get sanctioned and completely left India out, because I think they have the truth coming to them from other places.
Absolutely, and so we want to, but we should absolutely we should thank the Hindu advocacy groups in America for taking up this cause. I think Hindus should feel good that our vigilance is in America is helping. It helped in Santa Clara County. It is helping with the USCIRF. So we are actually making an impact in America. So thank you for all the Hindu advocates. And with that, Utsada, the final segment, the Hindu phobe of the week.
Yeah, Ajay bhai. So, would you like to go this time as the definer of the, because I usually carry
No,
that
so
segment
that
every.
is I would not venture to take away that pleasure from you. So that this is like I think I just I think that you do a much better job than me. So please go for Hindu phobe of the week.
So, I just want to bring into perspective some of the mainstream media headlines that came in India. There were probably a couple of hundred people, at most a couple of thousand people, out of a population of 1.4 billion, who believed and promoted the perspective that cow dung purifies the body and gives it some form of cleansing and protectiveness against the COVID-19 virus. A couple of hundred, at most a couple of thousand people, out of a population of 1.4 billion people. And there were major media outlets in the world that showed pictures of young men, Indian men, cleaning themselves with cow dung and calling it, doctors warn against cow dung as COVID cure. And there were 10 times that number of people in America and around the world who prayed in churches and who prayed in their religious institutions, called for non-acceptance of vaccines because it was against their religious beliefs. 10 times that number, and proportionally probably 100 times that number, proportion to the populations of these other Western countries. And none of these media outlets ever brought out an article targeting the entire community for what those isolated churches and religious institutions were saying about COVID. But lo and behold, when it comes to Hindus, a couple of hundred people, a couple of thousand people say some outrageous thing, and it is now the fault of the entire Hindu community. It's front page news, as if all Hindus in the world are out there bathing in cow dung as a cure for COVID crisis. So I think these newspapers, especially newspapers like outlets like Reuters, they need to do a research. Maybe they should do a research on what percentages of Hindus actually believe in the vaccine as a way of preventing COVID, and compare that to what many Christians believe in Western countries, and see how it comes out. And maybe that's the kind of research that will give them some credibility eventually. But for now, organizations like Reuters are the Hindu phobe of this week because of the way they took a minuscule minority of people and their misunderstanding or misrepresentation of COVID as emblematic and symbol of entire community. Thank you.
And Utsada, I mean, let me say a couple of things. Raza, a couple of years now, it's about 4 or 5 years ago. Raza Aslan tried to do the same thing. He took a small Aghori sect and their some of their habits or some of their actions, and he tried to paint entire a billion strong Hindu community with a broad stroke based on what the Aghoris in a particular part of India were doing, in Varanasi were doing, right? And so this is a systemic Hindu phobic attempt, if you will, to malign Hindus by taking a small incident, blowing it up, and painting Hindus by a broad brush. When it happens with other faiths, there are small byline saying that, oh, by the way, this little church here, or a little mosque here, or a little something else here, native tradition here, did that. And sometimes, actually, even those small actions are considered to be, well, this kind of act of faith, gives people inner strength to face adversities. Now, I would say that even this one, if there are, let's leave aside the medical part of it. But if someone is worshiping with devotion, if they're still taking their vaccines and if still practicing social distancing and things like that, but if they're worshiping in a way they think, or if following certain practices, conventional native practices, to malign them is nothing but an act of a superiority, that a cultural superiority. So if these people who are portrayed in this picture are truly you know believing the medical guidance, and then in addition to that doing other practices, and if they are this kind of a cultural attack by Reuters is nothing but an attempt to culturally and socially colonize the people who are believing in native practices.
Yeah, it stems from a very fundamental belief that anything that comes out of Hindu practices is intrinsically inferior to similarly irrational. I'm using the word irrational not as a negative word, but something that is not explained scientifically. That's similarly non-scientific practices coming out of Abrahamic or Judeo-Christian or Islamic systems. There is an intrinsic benefit of doubt given to uh, monotheistic systems over native, historically ancient tradition like Hindu Dharma, and that intense sense of superiority often derives these articles. So if there's a church doing it, it's for mental peace. It's for people in calling to a higher power for their personal well-being. But if a Hindu does it, it's superstition. And you will see that in a lot of even amongst Indians. Actually, these things are often driven by colonized minds within India as much as it's driven by external forces.
Yep, absolutely. So with that, Utsoda, thank you. Another interesting episode, and I think we covered a lot of ground. We went from all the way from Middle East to US to California to New Jersey to USCIRF and international aspects of things, and then we talked about the COVID-19 situation in India. It's a full show. I think we hope that peace prevails in the world. We also hope that we have good health prevails in the world. So all we have nothing but prayers for people who are facing difficulties due to COVID-19, not just India but around the world. And we also have, we also hope that peace prevails in Middle East. So with that, Utsoda, look, I mean, I wish you best of the weekend and coming week, and I will see you again and all our viewers again next week. But before we go, we have a really special tune for Hindu Lounge number 54, created by Decibel. And this is a really nice tune. So I was really impressed with this tune. Every week, Decibel creates a specific tune for that particular episode. And Utsada, I want to play that tune as the extra music as we come to an end of the show. I also want to apologize to Prashantji, who called, but for some reason he was not going to call. And I want to extend this open invitation to anyone from BAPS who wants to join the show. Please dial into the show next week, and we would love to hear your perspective. Okay, Utsada, with that, thank you. Have a good weekend, and namaste. Namaste to all our viewers. And this is the amazing tune for Hindu Lounge number 54 by our special group, Decibel.
Namaste, everybody.
And please continue the broadcast.